Hey everybody, P. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. Got Joe popping in here. We're gonna bring him in a second. I just wanted to say hey to everybody. It's been a crazy long week. We have 2 shows today. I think 5 shows, maybe 6 shows this week. It's been crazy. So I just wanted to and there's Joe. We got him in. I'm gonna pop him in now. Here comes Joe.
Hey Pete, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, man. I'm good. Hey, will you throw this is Joe Musselman and you're watching the Break It Down show? Say that for us. Say, this is Joe Musselman and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Hey, this is Joe Musselman, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Thanks, man. Hey, listen, you just keep killing it. Every time I see you, it's getting bigger, it's getting better, and now you're moving.
Yeah, I am. We're moving to Chicago. I'm moving the whole family to Chicago on March 2nd, so we have a few weeks left here in SoCal.
Yeah. Boy, the weather today is pretty close to perfect. A little cold right now because it's not 70 yet, but you're not going to get that many days out there. Are you all right with that?
I'm not okay with it at all. But it is what it is. I am super excited. Both of our families are in Chicago, so we're moving back home to be with them. We have 2 babies now. The last time I spoke with you, I only had 1 on the way, so now I have 2 present and accounted for.
Yeah, like I said, you're always moving forward, always doing things. We met through Gregg Hurwitz, who's a great dude. I want to throw a shout out to him. He's got a new book coming out. We'll probably get him next book that he does something, but just everybody definitely. Gregg Hurwitz's stuff is just fantastic. Be like adventure or comics or movie scripts or anything. You have 3 basic watchwords that you guys deal with, and you call it TLC: teams, leadership, and culture. Folks often focus in the zeitgeist of business talk about EQ, emotional intelligence, and I would say, and you don't have to agree with me on this, I would say that CQ, cultural acuity, is the superior element of the 2. Like EQ comes out of being good at CQ. Is that fair?
Yeah, for sure. So TLC, the actual equation is teams multiplied by leadership equals culture. Nice. So yes, I would I would completely agree that CQ, or as we call it at the fund, we call it TLCQ, because you're absolutely correct. Culture is by far the element and the variable that people leave and arrive at organizations. Pay will get you there. It can attract you, but it won't keep you. People leave, you've heard this before, people leave leaders. In essence, people leave cultures. And to me, that's what we focus on as a fund.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to get to. I want to explore culture a little more because, again, people say the word culture and they think you can just, and I would reject this truth. You need to say whatever you need to say, but I don't believe you can just simply walk in and design a culture. I've been to a lot of startups as a handyman, and I've seen the ping pong table, the keg, the snack shack, the dog in the office. Copycatting a successful culture is a way to build a culture, but culture doesn't tolerate design. It does what it wants to do. What are your thoughts on when you guys assess culture? It has to be done externally, has to be. So when you guys are looking at this and who you're going to partner up with, you are looking at something, you must shock the hell out of them sometimes with what you see culturally. That's
a great tee up, man. You know what you're talking about. So I hope everyone understands who's listening right now. Pete is an expert in cultural he's an avant-garde when it comes to these things throughout his role, throughout life. Extremely valuable perspective. You can't even tee up a question about culture the way that Pete did unless you have deep experience. So the first thing I would say is you're absolutely right. You cannot force culture, but yet it's being created all the time. Whether you're focusing on it or you're not focusing on it, it doesn't matter. It's being created, whether you like it or not. And a friend of mine, Rich Davini, who is a Navy SEAL commander, he wrote a great book called The Attributes. And he describes teams very simply. It's 2 or more people striving towards a common goal or objective. So the moment you become, this is why I wanted to focus on starting up organizations, meaning from inception to A, those earliest 0 stages before you even get to the 1, is what most excites me. It fits my personality. It fits what fires me up. It lights my soul on fire to see someone building something from nothing and bring it into the world for the first time. That's why I came into venture. It's the purest form. a venture, to a daring journey, right? And you're helping someone do that. And when they first, you're right, it can, in the early days, you can only assess 2 out of the 3 things that we just discussed. You can only assess the teams, and you can only assess the leadership. And therefore, that will give us an indication to the culture, TLC, right? So when we look at a solo founder, not that it matters, but if we look at the founding team as it stands, that will give us an indication. That's all you can measure. People talk about metrics. Well, when you just created something on a whiteboard, 6 months to a year ago at Stanford, or wherever it might have you, you don't have a culture yet. But yet, the moment that you have a team, you have something that can be measured. But you don't have metrics, you don't have financials, you don't have, in most cases at the seed stage, you may have some revenue, you may not. But what we can assess at the earliest stages possible is the team. And then I want to talk to them about leadership behaviors that they believe in, or leadership behaviors that they admire. That will give me a hint to the culture that they are daring to bring into the world. But it's all there. The clues are all there. The toughest challenge is knowing the right questions to ask at that stage that will give you some sort of indication. Like you said to me years ago when we first met, you said something I'll never forget. How do you find the bomb? You ask all the questions that have nothing to do about the bomb. Right? I'll never forget you said that to me. And it's the same type of inspiration where you want to know what type of culture they're going to build. You've got to ask all the questions that don't have to do with culture. You got to figure out how they think, act, feel, communicate, what they believe. You have to figure out what's driving their behaviors. You have to figure out how they consider discovering truth or untruth, how they react to rejection, because they're going to get a lot of that. All these things are kind of are cultural indicators as to what type of team they're going to attract, what type of leader they're going to become, and what type of culture they're going to create.
I love it. I love it. I love talking about culture with you because it's so inspiring. I want to go out and do culture stuff,
Right? Yeah, it's very exciting stuff.
Lieutenant General Hal Moore is credited with saying, "You can always do one more thing, in any situation to improve it." Right. And,
Sure.
And that is absolutely true, except for it's easy to get that wrong. Right. Like at some point, work-life balance has to do things. We tend to focus on work over work-life balance. And, it can become one of my other things that I've heard that I hate hearing in the military when I was in it was always check with higher. Well, then we can never get anything done because that means I'm going to have to up the chain of command all the way to the president and then maybe another, branch of the government to figure out if I should do this thing. But you can't always check with higher. You really can't, probably shouldn't always do one more thing. You should be able to identify where the work is. You should be able to identify where Lincoln was great at this. Lincoln saw the problem and applied pressure on that problem, not a cause of a problem, not a result of the problem. He was great at that. He saw the big thing and got to the core of things.
Yes.
How did you teach? I don't want to be unfair to that Stanford founder. How do you teach a 23-year-old kid that?
Yeah. So perfect segue, man. It's like, and just so people that are watching, we had no prep for this call. Like Pete and I jive in this way, but you literally teed it up perfectly for me to talk about this because you said something that Lincoln saw the big picture, right? Understanding the big picture with crystal clarity, freakishness, crystal clarity is so important. Tell me a leader that anyone followed that was unclear. Like it doesn't happen. You think of leadership, even at the presidential level or to the military level or to the business level, there's something about, now there's a difference between clarity and confidence, all right, and certainty. So there's a difference between clarity and certainty. What I mean by that is there's an equation that comes before TLC. All right. So think of these things, an example I use often when I talk about this. If you look at E equals MC squared, right? It's the end result of 12 to 15 chalkboards of work and eureka moments, right?
Yeah.
It take decades to arrive at. Well, the same is true for culture. So if culture is the result of teams multiplied by leadership and their behaviors equals culture, there's another equation that comes immediately before that. And for me, it's VMV to the 10th over principles and ethos. And here's why this is important about what you just said, the Lincoln concept of seeing the bigger picture. How do you tell a 22-year-old, we're giving Stanford lots of credit here. There's wonderful founders everywhere that are coming out of every, dark place in space and coming out with these great ideas. But obviously we know Stanford is a economic engine for startups. But what do you tell someone in general who's 22, 24, 25, 30 years old? How do you start? What is that first step? Well, I would argue that they've been forming this idea, because ideas find people, but they've been forming this idea. They've been shaped towards this idea for many, 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 many years. All right. The greatest founders have this breadcrumb trail of emotionally shaping events that have cultivated their optic and their lens to see something that no one else sees. Right. So they actually have more clarity around the idea than they could possibly imagine. So the first step of VMV is vision, mission, values. If we look at vision, how clearly do you see the future? What is that world you imagine and hope to create alongside others? Others is very important here, because I've never met a founder who's done anything extraordinary by themselves. So therefore, if you don't start off with this others mentality that will take teams, leaders, and a phenomenal culture to bring something into the world, you're mistaken, and you're already off to a bad start. The reason why I want to give our founders at Broom Ventures, our fund, this step up is, I usually hear at the pre-seed, seed stages 6 words that will end a company before it even starts. I do not have the time. When they say that about culture, when they say that about teams, when they say that about sharpening leadership skill sets, well, that's a lot right now. We're just head down on product. We need to figure out fit. We're X, Y, and Z, whatever excuse may be. I'm sorry, that's the wrong mentality. You have to find a way, to your point, to balance these things. In the early stages, it's all that matters. There is no HR department when there's 12 to 25 people trying to land on a moon. It doesn't work that way. So the only thing, it's similar to our country. Our country has a constitution. A couple of weeks ago, we celebrate Martin Luther King Day, right? And one thing, he said, I grew up idolizing him in almost every way, as a leader, as a community organizer, as a visionary. And he said something, on inside of our nation's capital, inside of the Lincoln Memorial, where he said, we just need to live up to our words on paper, right? And we could point to something and say there's something isn't right, right? Things are still not right, but man, we are trying to form a more perfect union every single day, but we have something to point to. Right. If founders don't create their vision, mission, value set, they will have nothing to point to and say, these are the things that we believe. So in the early days, how is a toxic culture formed? Imagine if you and I took 1 drop of black food coloring and dropped it in a pool or a cup of food, the whole pool turns black. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, like everything does, including democracy, right? So it's the same type of concept here in the early days of a company. You have to form a vision, mission, value, or your culture constitution to set you off in the right direction. They are your founding documents.
That's great, man. I love it. I love the blackened pool, and you can't just bail that water out. You can't just fire someone and make the pool change colors. You got to
drain the whole pool.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, these things are easier said than done. This is why what culture defies design. You can say, well, we've got great values here. Well, now you need someone externally to come in and test your values, right? If you're a CEO, you should be desperate to have someone who's not you go out and look at your company. It's same thing with commanders. When I worked with those guys, the moment the colonel or higher shows up, they live in this warped bubble around them because they have so much influence. They suck all the attention in. They have all the power, all the money, all the authority. They cannot see through that force field. You need a guy like Pete to go out and say, here's what's happening in your unit. Here's how your unit's performing in town.
Yes.
As a spy, my job was to help the commander win. And people often think it's threat-based. And yeah, there are a lot of people focused on that.
Yes.
There are not a lot of people focused on, are you winning in town? So like if I was to go out and say, hey, sir, there's a brigade massed up on the border up there, he would want to know about that. Hey, sir, all of your enablers that are creating governance don't seem to be creating governance, at least not outside of the office that they're in. If I walk 40 feet away and I ask someone what goes on in that building and they don't have an answer that involves the government, the boss wants to know that because he's got resources and capability to start to change that. And we're identifying specifically where the work is. When Hal Moore, God bless him, says do one more thing, let's find where that next thing should be. Let's not just do another thing like now we're going to paint the shitters. Like that doesn't do anybody any good, right?
Yes.
So finding that work, and I want to add one more element into this. It's
Yes.
not easy to do cultural work. One of the things I learned, and this is a tool, it's not an answer, it's not an equation. It helps you to understand that, hey, I'm not on target. If you understand, and it's a two-way communication path, so it's a little complex. If you understand someone or something's decision-making process and goal, and they likewise understand your decision-making process and your goal, you have a chance of being collaborative. Otherwise, here are the outputs you get. You get corruption, passive aggressive, incompetence. These are these negative values that you get when you hear those things. As a leader, you need to go, wait a second. Something is misaligned in culture. And I don't know what that thing is. That's another question, but that's another thought on like, how do you see this? How do you understand that our values aren't what they appear to be? And
Yes.
our assessment of this channel or this department or whatever. So what are your thoughts?
So eloquently stated. Just yesterday, so one thing I love doing, there's two value adds to our fund. One is we focus on extraordinary talent at the executive level for our founders, meaning these are people who believe what we believe as a fund and have multiple demonstrated successes. That's to us what matters most for our founders. We get people in their executive team that have multiple demonstrated successes and they believe what we believe about culture. The second thing is I love hosting leadership conversations up, down, and all around the organization. Everyone at an organization has the power to become a leader without question. And just yesterday, I had a team at one of our companies talking to me about what you just said in regards to misalignment of if you recognize the decision-making process and the end outcome. I forget exactly how you worded that, but now there's a chance for collaboration. If that doesn't happen, you're going to have the beginning of a toxic culture, passive aggressiveness, misalignment, trust, a lack of trust. I don't know where these decisions are coming from. They're being made in a vacuum, right? That's the exact conversation we just had. And now to get to your overlay question of, how do you think about that? Well, one thing I can for sure say, and you know this from your experience as well, that an organization will only ever become as clear as their leaders. That's it. So I can walk in, and you're right. There's a lot of culture work, obviously, that's been done over the years. And some folks say that you can only measure a culture externally. Some folks say you can only truly measure a culture from internally. But there's there's an equation that I keep talking about. The early equation is if I were to sit down with a leader and say, tell me about the vision of this company. Tell me about the mission. What are people getting excited to get out of bed every single day to do and work towards? What are the values, the stated values of the organization? I can tell you how aligned the rest of the organization is by how aligned leaders answer that question. So when you say, how do you kind of understand how aligned an organization is? This stuff, like you said already, it's super simple to say. It's very hard to do, which is why the equation is so important to guide founders. You have to talk about your vision up, down, and all around to the 10x and then some. You have to talk about mission up, down, all around to the 10x. It's like, if I were to host five tech companies logos, on a screen, and I tell you that, and let's say it's, Microsoft, Apple, SpaceX, Airbnb, and PayPal. And if I were to put, a vision of one of the companies up that said belong anywhere, you're immediately going to point to Airbnb. Like that's just what they do, right? That's their vision. They want people to land everywhere in the world and then belong anywhere, even though not being a part of it or being born there or their city of origin, whatever it might be. So I think you can totally sniff these types of things out with a rubric of questions that I've created for our fund to use on vision, on mission, on value set. So founders can begin to self-assess themselves first because they're the leaders. and then assess the organization and how clear they are on what has been put out to date.
A lot of these things, especially with culture, it's focused on trust. You have a trust bank. You're going to extend trust to somebody that you don't know because you've done this. You know that they're supposed to be uncomfortable with you. Same thing with rapport. And these items, I would suggest, are rubricable, if that's a word. You can say, and the military's bad at this. So, like, you will then transition to rubric number 2 in building trust. It doesn't work like that. You have to. There's some feel involved, but there's also a system. How do you approach trust building? Okay, first you establish rapport. Well, again, it's not just those words. Like, how do you do it? How do you know when you've got it? High level, high risk trust is way harder to get than low risk trust. Hey, I'll meet you tomorrow at 3. That's a low risk trusted building motion. At some point, a guy in my old line of work, I'm going to show up to someone's meeting. I mean, listen, Joe, I mean, you know this is crazy. I'm a spy. I'm going to show up I'm going to say, hey, when's convenient for you, Afghan elder, for me to show up? I'm letting them plan the meeting for me to show up to at their house. You talk about building your own ambush, but I know how to build trust. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is no different than, again, I'm not that smart. I'm not as smart as these founders. I'm not as smart as, everyone that is building in Silicon Valley. What I'm very good at doing is relying on intuition around alignment. It's no different than a marriage, Pete. A founder and a co-founder is no different than a marriage. You don't marry someone based off of features. You marry someone based off of where they're coming from and at a core value perspective. My wife and I are entirely different people coming from entirely different places, but our core values are identical. All right, they just are. And despite, it doesn't matter. Like when we have difficulties in a marriage, you overcome them because you're coming from the same place. A co-founding team is no different. It's truly not. And so when you think about building trust, it has to come from a deeper place. It has to come from a core value place, so that when you do arrive at these problems, you can say, hey, look, this is what we believe. We co-created, we co-authored these values on our wall together because we all believe in them. And it's so easy to highlight misalignment when everyone co-created and co-authored these things in the first place. So I continue to beat the drum over and over again around, I've seen it happen from Fortune 500 companies to Fortune 50 companies to startup companies. It doesn't matter if the vision of the company is not bought in and sold, if the mission is not something that gets buy-in every single day, and the values are not things that people believe in and then circulated up, down, and all around the organization to follow the leader into that, into the abyss, essentially, of the hardest, trying to accomplish the hardest things in the world, you won't have any trust. So the initial trust comes from vision, mission, values, always.
You are, we keep talking about the value of the words and the work within these words, right? And I know from your time working at the Honor Foundation, look, I've got a mug from a SEAL who started a company, Bone Frog Coffee, right?
Yep.
If those guys walk into, day one to your Honor Foundation meeting, they're not doing a thing. You're not picking up opinion until you've done all of the deep thinking and then went and talked to Joe and got challenged on everything, because you're saying, vision, mission, values. Yeah, but no shit. Like, what have you figured out? Like, why is the core? Is this really a core value for you? I know that you talked about this the first time when we had you and Scotty and I on the show. So talk about what it means to understand truly what your values and mission and vision are.
Oh, totally. So here's what I can say. Words are the most powerful things a company has when they're building something from nothing. And we all know this, the power of words. They impact people differently. Words mean things differently to others than they do some. So getting on the same page around definitions is very important. It's a huge part of that initial process of vision. First, what does that mean to us? I provide a definition to get everybody going, and then you can take it wherever you want. None of this, I have no ownership in any of this. It must be co-created by the company. And so to be able to create a vision in such a way, and then everyone's on the same page. For example, if I give my definition, which is We imagine a world, like I'll give you my personal vision, right? My personal vision is I imagine a world where people feel safe doing work they know and love. Now, when I break that down, that vision, where people, okay, let's define people. What do I mean by that? Where they feel safe. Safe, operative word. What does safe mean in this context of my vision?
Mhm.
Doing work they know and love. Work, what type of work? Know, what does that mean to me? What does that mean for someone to know the work? Well, I believe that very deeply that I created two businesses from nothing and I knew nothing about it when I started to create it. So don't be confused by saying doing work you know and love. What I say no, I mean, I know that there's a problem that found me and I can't shake it and I have to solve it. I know that. I know that that work to solve it is unknown. It's the known unknown, right? To steal a phrase, right?
Yeah.
The known unknown is I know that I want to solve this problem. The unknown part of that is I have no idea how to solve it. Therefore, the love part, meaning you have to love the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll never bring the world that you hope to create alongside others into fruition. That's what I mean by define it. Define every single word that ever could come up for questions because look, I've learned that I am on one side of a brain spectrum, and several others are on another side, and I can't complete anything of great value for the world without a whole brain. So I've had to learn more so about the opposite brain that I don't lead with and get those people on board and figure out how they think. Otherwise nothing will come into fruition. So therefore we have to, and I've learned this about, introverted people are statistically some of the greatest founders in the world. And I've also noticed that introverts, although introverted, are the ones having the loudest conversation within themselves. And I want to be a part of that conversation. I want to hear what they're saying to themselves. I want to learn about how they think, act, feel, and communicate to themselves. And once I do that, now I've got a whole brain looking at a problem, and there's really nothing you can't solve when you are doing work you know and love.
Oh, I have so many questions. So many questions. Okay, so when you're trying to found a company and you got a founder group, General Mattis would say you need to have some mavericks around, someone who's going to push back against the norm and challenge, right? Because you need that. We hate it, but we need rigor. But we also need to have tough skin, thick skin, so that when Pete shows up and says your culture is out of whack, you have to go, why is Pete saying that? Let's figure this out.
Sure.
Another problem for founders is you can't be the nexus of everything because you're not scalable. So you have to have enough trust and capability to find a person, who maybe. And look, and I'm gonna get fancy here. I'm gonna use Euler diagram. An Euler diagram does not mean that you intersect with this person. You might be in the same box, but adjacent or even somewhere different. We talk about Venns, but you scope back from a Venn and it's really an Euler, right? So these are the things that you've got to measure. And again, that 24-year-old Stanford kid who's a software whiz, maybe on the spectrum a little bit, because that's also very common with these guys where they can lock into a room for 20 hours and come out with a brilliant idea. But put them into a cocktail hour and they're like, no, thanks. How do we deal with these things? How do you guide? How do you see it?
Well, I think this goes back to, one big element of all of this is it's consistency of mission and purpose. So the reason why I say that is, I look down at this caption that you have here that says trust comes from a common core value. And before you can challenge directly, you must show people how you care personally. For folks that say that business is not personal, I would challenge you to. I would say that you don't know many founders. It's very difficult to remain objective and not look at this as if it's your baby as you're building it. And so the one thing I would offer is when you have a maverick, when you talk about folks inside the organization, if they're not all coming from the same place, Pete, if they're not all on board with the core values of the company, and they haven't illustrated to the team how much they care personally and professionally, they can't challenge directly well, right? So, we talk about radical candor a lot. There's books, there's phrases, we've all heard the term radical candor. I think kind candor is a much better way to think of it. And you can't have any kind candor in a company and challenge directly until people know how you care personally. Someone I admire who's been phenomenal at coaching and teaching me about candor is Ray Dalio, fund manager, Bridgewater, one of the largest hedge funds, if not the largest at any given time in the world. And one thing that Ray talks about often, principles, which we all know, but it's the way that him and his team challenge each other directly, because we can't be afraid of truth. You can disagree with people, but does it mean that they're wrong? I think that's something people need to let set in. And does that person disagree well? And disagree well is a trick question. So another issue that we're working through with some founders right now is, if I were to ask someone on a founding team or a co-founder, do you disagree well? It's a trick question. You can't know that. Mm-hmm. Only your team can answer that question, whether or not you disagree well. It's the same thing with leadership, right? Are you a good leader? Well, it's tough for me to answer that. Only my people can answer that. And I feel strongly about this belief around kind candor, caring personally and professionally in order to challenge directly, and then disagreeing well. All of this is something that happens in real time in companies at the tactical level and at the beginning stages. The tactics are really what matter most. It's like, we have this great vision. We have some funding now. What do I do on Tuesday at 8 a.m.? Like, how do we begin talking about this stuff, executing on this stuff? And that's a challenge for everyone. And if some founder said that it's not a challenge to execute, on Tuesday at 8 a.m., but we see the vision and it's easy to execute, I would have a lot of questions about that, because it's by far one of the most difficult things to do in the world, let alone have a team of 10, 15, 25, 50 people all execute in the same direction in the earliest stages. It's tough.
I've worked a lot with commanders, learn to speak colonel, learn to speak commander. And one of the things that's brilliant about that is any lieutenant colonel in the military has read all of the books. They've probably got, if not 2 master's degrees, or there's one in their future, and they're not reading, simple books. These guys are reading really hard books and then applying those principles in their day-to-day job as either they're an internal leader working on someone's staff, or as the boss. You get to learn a lot from these guys. And one of the colonels I worked with said a couple interesting things to me that kind of resonate with what you're talking about. And he was kind of a servant leader, sort of, in that vein. He said, sometimes my job, Pete, is to play the commander. And we go to NTC, which is the National Training Center. And I know that sometime in the next day or two, the suicide bomber is going to show up. I've been through the exercise. I've seen the experience. I can game the game by stopping that from happening. However, sometimes I have to play the commander, and my job is to let that person blow themselves up so that my crew gets the lesson of this training, right? And that goes to ego, that goes to everything else. Not easy to play the job of the guy that you're trying to play so someone else can learn the lesson. And the other thing he said, and these things kind of blend together, is I'll be hard on someone, and when I call down my thunder on them, it can burn them for the rest of their time they're in the unit. So I'm responsible for giving them wins after that. I'm responsible for finding their mentor and building them up, because they have to believe that they can, and their peers and their ordinate leaders have to also believe that this person can be valuable. Otherwise, I've taken an asset and destroyed it over a single mistake, which is often not that important of a mistake.
That's so true. The worst thing a leader can ever experience, the worst thing a founder can ever experience, is silence in a room from people that that he or she has brought on board to support them. Eventually there's that saying that eventually you hire people to kind of tell you what to do, and if you stop listening enough, you'll be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. That's a nightmare for a founder, without question. So I I do think it's a challenge. There's the other thing too that we've got going on here is like I use this analogy often. My mother is a wonderful Italian, 100% Italian woman who has the best recipe for lasagna that you ever could imagine, right? Like I walk into the house, and if the ingredients are on the table, I know that lasagna is coming. I can smell it, right? All the ingredients are on that table. If I were to take my mother out of that situation and put a stranger at that table, they would not know what to do, right? So when you talk about scaling a founder's intuition, they have to. My mother's the founder of that recipe. Her recipe is a handful of this, a dash of this. Taste it until it's right. There's a great phrase that I heard recently that your ancestors will tell you when it's enough when it comes to food, right? When you taste it, it's like you just know that that's enough. Founders have so much of their intuition that they have to scale. Why are they not talking about it all the time? And why aren't they writing it down often? The way to do that, the way to scale that recipe, the way to scale that intuition is to have a founding document. And that's the culture constitution of the company. Write down what you see in your mind. Write down the mission, why it's important to you. Write down what values you hold, because we all hold personal values. But the minute you bring one other person, you are now a team, right? Back to Rich Davini's definition that a team is just two or more people working towards a common goal and objective. Well, the minute you bring on teammate number two, now a culture is being formed. Now you're colliding two sets of individual core values. Now you need to combine them, right? So there is a very clear recipe. And like you see, this is what we're trying to find at Broom. When we see a team, we can see the recipe, right? We know that there's something great on the other side, like Wendy's lasagna, right? If they don't put things together the right way along the way, the end product won't taste very good. And therefore they need support in regards to those early stages of building this cultural constitution. It will act as their hiring document. It will act as their thing they point to when something isn't right. It's going back to your roots of a company to scale what you initially believed, and also an accountability tool for leadership.
When you guys were evaluating a company and they're close, you guys want to say yes, but they're not quite there. Can you send them back to the miners and have them work on a couple of things? Or does it terminate and there's just too many opportunities and you got to go forward? I don't know how you guys do that.
Sure. Great question. That's a great question. So I would say we see around 300 to 500 deals a month, right? Wow. So there's a lot of inbound coming in from co-investors that we work alongside, from people who believe what we believe, from our own investor pool sending us opportunities all the time. There's no going back to the miners for a founder. That's why I love working with founders. The boats are burned. There is no miners. There's only going forward all the time. There's a reason why it's a reason why funding goes, seed, A, B, C, D, E, pre-IPO, IPO, etc. There is no A, B, C, B, A, B, C, D, E. Like, it's always forward progression. There is no minors. And when you see different companies, struggling to raise dollars or calling rounds different things multiple times and spending and not as being capital efficient as we would hope, our initial lens is TLC. Does this team do the leaders, and do they have the right culture optic to build something great? Yes, that's our first lens. Then we do the tech analysis, right? If we feel that the people at the helm are going to be great captains and stewards of this vision, mission, value set, now we'll analyze the tech. And one thing to talk about when you say who gets sent back to the miners, we're not in charge of any of that. The reason why I love founders is they are for sure in charge of their fate and their destiny. And I believe in that. And I define fate and destiny very differently. But at the same time, it's up to us. We're going to miss opportunities. We're going to pass on things that are going to become great. That's part of that's part of it's not the game. It's just part of the business. You're
Yeah.
going to miss out on certain opportunities. All we can do is use our filter to try to find the best opportunities that will go off and create companies that we feel will be great, again, stewards, Sherpas of this vision, mission, value mentality to the world. And they say, if the, Andreessen says all the time, tax software eats, is going to eat the world. If that's the case, people are the ones that are going to be running the software, at least for hopefully the next century, before it starts running us. But at the same time, people will be at the helm. Don't you want people that have a positive vision, mission, and value set running the technology that will be running our lives in essence? I certainly do. Commander's intent. It's the exact same analogy in tech. Whoever is at the helm will be leading this organization, and their value set will go up, down, and all around the org. Therefore, we want to invest in founders who believe what we believe.
That's so good. I saw a funny clip of Fat Joe, the rapper. He became a producer, and he's like, "Yeah, Eminem told me one day that he gave me his demo tape 6 times, 6 times." But that says something about like the game, right? So Eminem is relentless. You may not see it, and maybe he's not ready when you see him and hear him, but he keeps going, and then finally Dr. Dre discovers him, right? So you can have someone walk in the door, and maybe they're not right for you. Maybe someone's formula who's in the next building over is a formula that's better suited to that person. Maybe they need some seasoning. And then that founder has to send themselves back to the minor leagues and read the next book or unlock the next puzzle. One of the things that you often hear in Silicon Valley is, I'm a serial entrepreneur. Like, dude, you're 25. Yeah, maybe you started 3 companies and everything else, but it takes a minute to become an actual serial entrepreneur. So the guy's been on the show, Chris Duggan, and he starts companies all the time, and he exits them. He either IPOs them or sells whatever. He knows how to do this. And he says things that blow me away all the time because he's learned the path. And one of the things he says is, when you hire your director of sales, about 18 months, 2 years later, you have to fire that guy, because if they've done their job, they don't know how to go past that point. You need to find the right sales manager for that next iteration of your company. And I'd never thought about that. I'm like, no, you bring your guy with you. Like, nope. You got to find a guy who's got that next level, that next jump. You need that. The other guy's going to be fine. He's a sales guy. He knows what to do. He'll go somewhere else. But the guy you need is not that guy anymore. And you got to just cut him. And that's how ruthless you might have to be in that business. And that makes me, just saying it out loud, Joe, it makes me feel bad. But also Chris is like, he's like, doesn't matter if it feels bad. It's what's good for the company.
Yeah. So for sure, there are different approaches to those types of situations, right? I've seen counter examples of that. I've seen examples of that. I've seen the counter examples work great, and I've seen that example work great too. So there's a lot of contextual kind of evidence and supporting evidence that I would need to even make that call. But I can tell you that look, with startups, institutional knowledge is like gold, right? Like gold. And for me, it is your job as a leader to nurture first, and nature, kind of second. And it's funny how, yes, once someone you feel has reached a cap on their skill sets, it's like, well, people don't fall to the level of their ability; they fall to the level of their skills. So I agree with him in that thinking. But the question is, does the institutional knowledge, does the culture fit? The spoke of compensation that goes into this one person, is it aligned across the board? And the one thing they need is to up their skills. One example in real time that's happening this past week. Do I call the person that built the company? This is, again, very applicable to what you just stated. Do I promote the person who's currently like senior director or VP of sales to be head of sales for the organization? Or this is a real kind of approach that we narrowed it down to being a little more binary, or do we ask him to hire his leader? And that is a different approach. I wouldn't want a leader to come on board and do things, and coming in and just redesigning. And sometimes that's necessary, but not when everything is going great. Like, this sales leader's done a great job, right? So we both, one of the values of this company is we've got your back. So if we've got your back, right, then let's get your back again and hire your leader. Who do you want to follow? Who's a culture fit for this company? That's a very different approach than, we got to fire you because we're at a different stage and you don't have the skill set. And well, how is anyone ever going to get the skill set? Like, hire great leaders. That person's super valuable to the company.
One of the toughest things you have to do once you start getting somewhere is, as you've gathered these great people, you've got to advance them, right? And so you create a new role. It's, vice president of fill in the blank, whatever it's going to be, and you're like, you know what? I think Joe and Pete are really competitive for this internally, but we also want to bring in someone from the outside. Once you pick that one of those three people, and they're all stars, every single one of them you'd love to have, but it's only one job. You have a problem of at least one person internally not making it. And if Pete doesn't get the job, guess what? I'm looking. I'm no longer part of this company because, you didn't pick me. That means you didn't see value, because I for sure think I can do the job. If you bring in someone outside and you marginalize two people, I mean, that's a bear. Or do you bring in someone outside and risk the cultural fit, even if they're maybe a slightly better? I don't know what you do with that. Do you create a new position? What do you do when you have fantastic achievers that you're ready to promote, but you can't promote all of them?
Yeah, see, these are the nuances that go into this, to these types of leadership questions, right? When you have multiple rock stars and you can't promote everybody. Well, here's one thing. So I'm an advisor to a few different companies that focus on culture, like literally as a service. I believe that you can quantify culture. Hence the reason why I've come up with the equation. I think you can come up with an alignment score on how aligned the organization is up, down, and all around in regards to your vision, mission, values, the principles, the ethos of the company, the teams, the leadership, the culture, the whole thing, right? If the leader is not clear on that score from the beginning, and you have three rock stars who are performing, you will find a leader, meaning someone who is in the lead in regards to that score. And in a lot of those instances, this is when you also can talk a bit to the leadership team and put it on them to give you their thoughts and feedback. If a leader is that concerned about it, meaning you have three people in a tie, you turn to your people every time. You turn to the documents of the organization that matter, the vision, mission, value set, the cultural constitution of the company. The answer will present itself quickly. It has in every example that I have where I've been involved with these types of decisions, with who to promote, who to keep, who to let go. These are the questions that I want to be there. I have a founder Slack channel inside of our internal Broom workspace on Slack, right? And the founder work channel, I would be the happiest man in the world if I sat around all day and the only thing I did was help founders solve and answer these types of questions in real time. And again, I didn't explain this in the beginning, but Broom Ventures, why do we call it Broom? Well, look, everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching, you have a broom in your home. You know where it is, and you usually go and get it to do a very specific job, and that job typically involves work. When a founder has a tough tactical decision, usually these are ones they don't necessarily want to turn to their board for, which is why Broom Ventures does not target board seats. I would much rather be the partner that my co-investors in the deal, the leads and the co-leads, the bigger funds, know that they can bring me in to be there to have those tough, difficult conversations before board meetings, after board meetings for that founder, along the journey. I care about the journey, right? I want to be there in the moment. Up at 10 o'clock last night, walking a founder through an email to let someone go at the organization. And then also the optic to the team. What would this founder put out to the team after they let this person go? And we're editing in real time. Like that type of support in the beginning with a company of 25 people is really what founders need, that they know they have like a corner person, right, to turn to instantly. So back to the point is, if I'm doing that only, sitting here all day and supporting founders from 7 in the morning to 10 at night on this Slack channel, and that's all I care about. It's all I care about. So it's been very meaningful to me, and the fund has grown to 20 companies now, and we'll be at 30 by June. So our pace is strong, and we're doing really well.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. I love to hear that. The one of the other words we haven't really talked about a lot, but it means something. It's really important to be able to break down what it means is ethos, ethics, right? And we struggle with this because everybody has a different opinion. It's like culture. The definition for cultural values is anything you can't explain through DNA, right? That's culture, and it's because that's really what it is. It's not fun. It's not comfortable. It's not a bullseye, but
Yes.
it's ethics. Same thing.
Yeah.
Ethics collide, and right and wrong blend, and you can reach what I believe is a point of ethical saturation where you cannot reliably make a good ethical choice if you always try to do the ethical thing. The military tries this. At some point, you no longer can ethically enter into this ethical conversation because you lack the value, the vision to do it. So I'll give you an example just to kind of clarify. When you send a bunch of warriors out into a battlefield and they're trying to empower women and they're trying to build buildings and they're trying to develop governance, and they're also, hey, by the way, if you see local men who are having sex with boys, you need to also deal with that, and you can't do it. There's no person that is able to sort out the ethical path through all of that things. Yes, it's wrong for a man and a boy to have sex, of course. It's also wrong as a reserve commander who's trying to bring his family home. You know, your company commander is a lawyer, right? It's also wrong to put them out there ill prepared for the situation that they're in. And so it's like, how do I deal with this man and boy situation? And also on this, all these things, you can't do them all.
Yes. So Pete, you and I can get into a wonderful conversation about ethos alone, right?
Yeah.
And you've inspired me in many ways over the years, watching you grow this show and your presence. And I'll be launching a production and a show in about 3 months called The Equation.
Yeah.
And these are the only things that we want to talk about. And we're going to have a tremendous guest list. It's being produced by Caspian Studios, and I'm super excited to work with that team.
Nice.
But when it comes to ethos, I define it simply, and then I define it historically. So defining it simply means, throughout all of the 5 forces that I talk about, the vision, mission, values, principles, and ethos. When we think about ethos, first defining it historically, it's a Greek word. We know this. It means character. And it's used to describe the guiding beliefs or ideals that characterize a community, a nation, or even an ideology, right? The Greeks also use this word to refer to things like the power of music, right? To influence emotions, behaviors, and even morals. Early Greek stories, we know this, exhibit this idea in a very compelling way. Like the words used in different types of rhetoric. It's literally based on Greek terminology used by Aristotle around his 3 artistic proofs, right? The modes of persuasion. So when we think about the modes of persuasion and we think about ethos, one of the examples that I use is, and if for everyone listening, I know you're going to kind of nod your head in affirmation at this because everyone always does. How many times have you been to an About Us page on a website and left knowing nothing about them? All the time, right? All the time. Or at least in my research, it's 9 out of 10 times you leave knowing very little about them, right? The way I define ethos personally, according to this rubric, is the unspoken spirit manifested, right? When we think about the way things are done around here as a definition for culture that's widely used, the unspoken spirit, like you walk into a SEAL team, you walk into Airbnb, you walk into an Olympian's locker room, you walk into the halls of Juilliard, there's this unspoken spirit, the way things that are done around there, that it's unspoken. There's just things you do that nobody talks about. And when we work with companies, that unspoken spirit manifested, meaning that the unspoken spirit is the definition of ethos, but manifested means we're bringing it into the world. We're putting it on paper, right? So we're trying to take those things that are unspoken, bring them into the world, make them the way things are done around here on paper. And I would challenge everyone, there's something called the Navy SEAL ethos, right? I read that in 2006 for the first time. And I thought to myself, that's for me. Everything in there spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
It was the unspoken spirit of that community manifested on paper. And I could read it and I could see it and I could feel it. And I'm like, if this community lives up to 1/16 of what is on paper, I want to be a part of that with all of who I am. Now think about that as an HR function.
Yeah.
All right. Because that community knew themselves, or at least knew how to describe themselves at their best. That's very important, right? Everything is a sliding scale on the 5 forces: vision, mission, values, principles, ethos. Even values, I'm a Christian, 10 commandments, honor thy father and mother. Sliding scale. Some days I'm at a 9. Some days I'm at a 2. I need to up my average every day. My vision, some days I'm practicing artistry and I'm at a 9. Other days I'm at a 2. I'm trying to up the average, right? When it comes to ethos, it is you're taking yourself at your best. You're taking your company at your best. And you are putting it down on paper, because this is what the SEAL ethos did for me, and this is what it does for others. It gives you 2 answers instantly. You read it and you go, this is for me. Or you read it and you say, oh, hard pass, not for me. Which is the best thing you want for a company, is you want to attract the people who believe what you believe. Now that's different than like being you and a bunch of groupthink. And I want people who believe and say and do what I do. Like I'm not talking about that. When you attract your partner in life, whatever that may be, whether it's a co-founder, whether it's your wife, husband, spouse, partner, doesn't matter. You attract them with who you are, your unspoken spirit, and you're manifesting that every day by the way you think, act, feel, and communicate through your values, right? So like the only way you can attract the right people to your organization is by truly knowing what you believe. That is powerful. Martin Luther King, I'll steal a line from a great leadership coach who said, who paraphrased this, like, Martin Luther King didn't stand, in the 60s and on our nation's capital and say, I have a 99-point plan. And here it is. No, he said, I have a dream. And then he talked about that vision with crystal clarity. And I've since broken down that speech. We're going to talk about that in the Equation podcast, because he had all the elements there, which is why he was able to create a national movement, a global movement that's lasted and earned him a monument, and it's deserving, and his words live on forever. So I let me just say this one thing about an ethos too, because so many companies ask me about this and they want to create it first, or they say, hey, can you just help us create the careers page? It doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
The SEAL teams were around for 60 years before they wrote that ethos. They had to exist. They had to attract. They had to forge. They had to battle. They had to fight. This is why I wanted to work with founders. SEALs signed. I signed on the dotted line to give my life for something bigger than myself. I feel that founders metaphorically do the same thing, the right ones, the best ones. I'm not comparing them to operators and war fighters in the sense of, like, obviously that sacrifices their life, but metaphorically, I'm saying the best founders do sign on this metaphorical dotted line to give their life for something that's bigger than themselves. I just wanted to work with a parallel community and mindset. That's how I chose to work with founders. But I digress. But the companies that talk about doing ethos first, they don't get it. You have to work towards that. You can't have an ethos before a vision. You can't have principles before a mission. You can't have values before a vision. You can't have values before a mission. It must go vision, mission. Now we have a team. Now we have values. Now we have leadership principles, what people do act in real time tactically that are universally true. And then we have an ethos. Like I see this so clearly with companies, that it's the ultimate filter and mechanism in the early stages of an organization to be clear on these things, to filter in those who believe what you believe and filter out those who just don't.
Yeah. I love it. I don't want to take too much more of your time, but I want to throw one more thing out there and at you and let you talk on it, and also promote everything that you're doing. Obviously, you've got the link up here for Broom Ventures /values. You'll get it. You'll figure it out. Joe's been on the show before. Go look on the Break It Down show page or on the YouTube channel and just type in Joe Musselman. One of the things I've been thinking about recently, and I know founders do this because I get pitched from early stage startups on I'm your podcast friend, right? but they don't know me. They don't know my business. They just assume that they have something for me. So businesses have a problem when they say, let's get the stakeholders together. And all organizations do this. The military would do it. Like, hey, we're going to evaluate the Afghan government. And then I would raise my hand. There's no Afghans in the room. Oh, it's a classified meeting. All right. So my question is if you're going to have stakeholders, what tent are you building? What shape is it? We're talking a GP medium? We're talking a bell tent like I've got here with one center pole and a bunch of small pegs? Are we talking a fest tent? What size tent are you building? And then if the podcasters for the podcast startup are not a stakeholder, you got a problem. You got a real problem. Maybe they're not a stakeholder, but they are the tent.
Yes. No. I mean, that's a great visual too. And I was going to ask you if you're camping. I could tell that there's a bunch of gear in the background. So I could tell you this. That's a great analogy. I've never thought of that, like with a tent, because it's true. What size tent are you trying to build? Who are you trying to? Sorry about that. The noise in the background. 1 second. I'm sure it'll continue, but we're moving, so
you're fine. We're basically done here. We'll wrap after this.
Okay. Well, all I'm saying is, again, that goes directly into vision, to understand what size tent you hope to build, who you hope to house, who you hope to be in your charge. All of that is so important. So it all comes back to vision and mission and values.
I love it. Everybody go check out what Joe does at broom.ventures. You'll get it. And if you want to get a hold of him, he's on LinkedIn. It's not hard to find him. Stand by for 1 sec, Joe. Let me wrap this thing up. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank